Imagine getting seriously sick 20,000 years ago. No doctor, no pharmacy, no hospital waiting room, no antibiotics sitting in a bottle on a shelf. Just you, your body, and a small group of people who had probably seen sickness before. And somehow, they still had ways of dealing with it. Not because ancient humans understood diseases the way we do today. They didn't know about bacteria. They didn't understand viruses. They couldn't look inside the body with a scanner. And they certainly didn't have a laboratory where someone could identify exactly what was making you sick. But they weren't completely helpless either. For thousands of years, humans learned by watching. They noticed which plants caused pain to disappear, which foods made someone feel worse, which wounds became dangerous, which symptoms usually passed on their own, and which ones meant something was seriously wrong. This created something surprisingly important, a primitive form of medical knowledge. Imagine a prehistoric hunter returning to camp with a deep cut on his leg. Today, you might clean the wound, receive medical treatment, and possibly get antibiotics if an infection develops. For an ancient human, the first response was much simpler. The wound had to be cleaned. Dirt, blood, and foreign material could be removed. The injury might then be covered with whatever useful material the group had available, and someone had to watch it. Because one of the most important advantages ancient humans had was not medicine. It was experience. If someone had seen a wound become swollen, painful, and dangerous before, they could recognize the warning signs when it happened again. This knowledge could be passed from one generation to another. A young hunter could watch an older member of the group treat an injury. Years later, that same hunter might teach someone else. There was no medical textbook. The lesson was memory. And memory could be surprisingly powerful. But wounds were only one problem. What happened when you had a fever? Today, a fever can be measured within seconds. You can use a thermometer, describe your symptoms to a doctor, and receive treatment based on what caused the illness. Ancient humans had none of this. Instead, they had to judge the condition of the sick person by observation. Was the person conscious? Could they drink? Were they breathing normally? Were they becoming weaker? Were they getting better or worse? These simple observations could determine what happened next. And sometimes the best treatment was surprisingly familiar. Rest. If someone was too weak to hunt, the group had to adapt. Someone else might bring food. Someone might provide water. Someone might stay nearby. This reveals something important about ancient healthcare. It wasn't always about curing the disease. Sometimes it was about keeping the sick person alive long enough for the body to recover. And that distinction matters, because many illnesses do not require a drug to disappear. The human immune system can fight many infections on its own. Ancient people didn't understand the immune system, but they could observe its results. Someone became sick. They rested. They recovered. The same thing happened again. Over generations, humans could learn which situations required intervention and which simply required time. But ancient humans didn't rely only on rest. They also had plants. And this is where their knowledge becomes particularly interesting. Long before modern pharmacies existed, humans experimented with the natural world around them. They ate leaves. They chewed roots. They brewed plants in water. They applied crushed material to injuries. Some experiments were probably harmless. Others were not. Because nature is full of substances that can affect the human body, some plants contain chemicals that reduce pain. Others can influence digestion. Some can reduce inflammation. And some are extremely poisonous. Ancient humans couldn't identify these chemicals. They had to discover their effects through experience. Imagine finding a plant that makes a stomachache feel better. You wouldn't know why it worked, but you would remember it. And if it worked repeatedly, the knowledge became valuable. Eventually, certain people within a community may have become especially familiar with plants and their uses. They weren't modern doctors. They didn't have modern medical science. But they could possess something like an enormous living database of local knowledge. They knew what grew nearby, what could be eaten, What could be used on wounds? Today, we might open a medicine cabinet. Ancient humans had the landscape. But plants weren't always the safest option. Without scientific testing, there was no reliable way to know the correct dose. A plant that helped in a small amount could potentially become harmful in a larger one. And identifying the correct species could also be difficult. So ancient medicine was filled with uncertainty. Sometimes experience helped, sometimes luck helped, and sometimes the treatment itself probably made things worse. There was another major difference between ancient and modern healthcare. Modern medicine tries to identify the cause of an illness. Ancient humans often had to focus on the symptoms. If someone had pain, they tried to reduce the pain. If someone was cold, they provided warmth. If someone was dehydrated, they needed water. If someone couldn't eat, they needed whatever food they could tolerate. The approach was practical. Solve the problem you can see. And this becomes especially important when we look at dehydration. Today, severe dehydration can be treated with carefully prepared fluids containing water and essential electrolytes. Ancient humans obviously didn't have modern rehydration solutions, but they understood something fundamental. A sick person who couldn't keep fluids down was in serious danger. Water could become one of the most important things they could provide. And knowing where clean water was located could be just as valuable as knowing where animals were. This also explains why the environment mattered so much. For an ancient human, health wasn't separated from survival. Your water source mattered, your food mattered, your shelter mattered, the cleanliness of your surroundings mattered, and your ability to stay warm could determine whether you recovered from an illness. Today, we can sometimes ignore these environmental factors because modern infrastructure protects us from many of them. We turn on a tap, we control the temperature inside our homes, we refrigerate food, we have sanitation systems. Ancient humans had to manage these problems directly, and one of the biggest dangers was contaminated food. They couldn't see most of the microorganisms that cause foodborne illness, but they could see the consequences. A certain food made people sick. Perhaps another method of preparing it seemed safer. Over time, repeated experience could produce rules about what to eat and how to handle it. This didn't eliminate foodborne illness, but behavioral knowledge could still reduce some risks. The same principle applied to water. A clean-looking stream wasn't necessarily safe. Ancient humans couldn't test water for pathogens. They had to rely on environmental clues and experience. Modern humans have laboratories. Ancient humans had observation. And observation could extend to something even more surprising: social isolation. Today, when someone becomes seriously ill, we might call a doctor, but we might also have family members checking on us. Someone brings food, someone buys medicine, someone drives us to the hospital. Ancient humans depended heavily on the same basic idea. The group had to care for vulnerable members. A sick person couldn't always hunt. They couldn't always gather food. They might not even be able to defend themselves. If the group simply abandoned everyone who became weak, survival would become much harder. So caring for sick individuals could become part of social life. And there is archaeological evidence suggesting that some ancient humans survived severe injuries that would have made independent survival extremely difficult. That means somebody helped them. Someone provided food. Someone protected them. Someone stayed close. Healthcare, in this sense, wasn't always a profession. Sometimes it was cooperation. But what about broken bones? This is where ancient treatment could become surprisingly sophisticated. If someone broke a limb, the goal was obvious: keep it still, give it time to heal. A badly aligned bone could create permanent problems. Ancient humans didn't understand bone biology in the modern sense, but they could observe what happened when injuries healed. They could recognize that some movements made an injury worse. They could support damaged limbs. And they could create simple forms of immobilization using materials available around them. Modern hospitals can use X-rays, casts, surgery, and implants. Ancient humans had none of those technologies, but the basic biological fact remained the same: broken bones need time to repair. Sometimes the body does much of the work itself. This is one of the strangest things about ancient healthcare. Their understanding was limited, but the human body still followed the same biological rules. A wound still needed time to heal. A broken bone still needed stability. A sick person still needed water and energy. And an infection could still become deadly. The biggest difference wasn't the human body, it was everything surrounding it. Today, if you develop appendicitis, you can potentially undergo surgery. Thousands of years ago, there was no surgical ward waiting for you. There was no imaging machine confirming what was happening inside your abdomen. There was no reliable antibiotic waiting afterward. Some conditions that are treatable today were simply far more dangerous in the past. This is where we need to avoid romanticizing ancient medicine. Ancient humans were resourceful, but resourcefulness did not make them invincible. A modern person with a serious bacterial infection may have access to antibiotics. An ancient person did not. A modern patient with severe blood loss can receive transfusions. An ancient patient could not. A modern surgeon can operate on internal organs using highly controlled procedures. Ancient humans had extremely limited options for many internal problems. So, surviving illness in the ancient world wasn't simply about having clever natural remedies. It was also about avoiding danger in the first place. And prevention may have been one of the most important forms of ancient healthcare. Avoiding dangerous animals, choosing safe shelters, learning which plants were poisonous, handling food carefully, protecting wounds, keeping fire under control, knowing when to rest. All of these behaviors could influence survival. Modern healthcare often feels like something we access after becoming sick. Ancient survival required health-related decisions every single day. But there was another part of ancient healing that modern medicine largely separates from treatment: belief. When you don't understand what causes an illness, you need an explanation. Ancient societies developed many explanations for sickness. Some involved spirits, others involved supernatural forces, ancestors, curses, or religious beliefs. And these beliefs could influence treatment. People might perform rituals, use symbolic objects, pray, sing, or ask a spiritual specialist for help. From a modern scientific perspective, these practices cannot replace antibiotics, surgery, or other effective medical treatments. But they reveal something important about ancient humans. They weren't only trying to change the body, they were also trying to make sense of suffering. Today, when we become sick, we often search for a diagnosis. We want a name, a cause, a treatment plan. Ancient humans also wanted answers. They simply had a very different framework for finding them. And sometimes, different parts of ancient healthcare could exist at the same time. A person might use a plant, rest beside the fire, receive food from the group, and participate in a ritual. There was no strict boundary between physical treatment, social care, and belief. Modern medicine eventually separated many of these things into different systems. Doctors treat disease. Pharmacists provide medication. Hospitals provide specialized care. Scientists study pathogens. Psychologists study mental processes. Public health systems focus on preventing disease across entire populations. Ancient humans had none of this specialization, but they had something else: thousands of years of accumulated trial and error. Every generation inherited knowledge from the previous one. Some of that knowledge was useful. Some was probably ineffective. Some was dangerous. And some may have been lost completely. This is why ancient medicine shouldn't be imagined as either completely primitive or secretly equivalent to modern medicine. It was neither. It was an early attempt to solve an enormous problem with limited information. Humans became sick. Humans got injured. Humans watched what happened. And humans remembered. Eventually, those observations became traditions. Some of those traditions influenced later medical practices. Others disappeared. And modern medicine developed by adding something ancient humans didn't have: systematic scientific testing. Today, we can isolate pathogens, test drugs, compare treatments, measure doses, study anatomy, use microscopes, and run controlled clinical trials. We can look at the same problem that ancient humans faced and approach it with vastly more information. But the fundamental question hasn't changed. What do you do when the human body stops working normally? 20,000 years ago, the answer might have been a warm fire, water, food, a medicinal plant, a skilled healer, and a group willing to protect you. Today, it might be a hospital, antibiotics, surgery, diagnostic machines, and a team of specialists. The technology is almost unimaginably different, but underneath all of it is the same ancient instinct. When someone is sick, you help them. And perhaps that is one of the oldest forms of medicine humans ever created.